Okay, Joni, we are recording. I'm so excited to have you here with me today. I want to give a really quick, before we jump into our discussion, a real quick overview for folks watching this. Maybe this is the first video you've seen that I've done. My name's Beverly Baker. I'm a self-defense instructor. I've been teaching the physical aspects for, gosh, over 20 years now. And in the last couple of years, I've been kind of focusing or shifting my focus rather, still including the physical stuff, but kind of incorporating the more street smart aspects. How do you read an environment? How do you, kind of mitigate risks long before it happens? And just kind of from a street style approach. I think of myself as an urban explorer first and a self-defense instructor second. And a lot of that has to do with, we always think of self-defense as the kicking and the punching and that kind of thing. But really so much of it to keep ourselves safe and still, and it's not just about being as safe as possible, it's about, my approach is exploring the world. How can you get away with as much as you can while kind of having these skills. And so I developed this series, and it's an interdisciplinary series. And Joni, I'm so excited to have you here as my guest. The approach here that we're talking about in self-defense more is it can be psychological, mental, spiritual. If you go back and look at some of the others, you'll see conversations I've had with psychologists on fight, flight, freeze. So the goal is to have this a really disciplinary conversation so that when people think about self-defense, it's a bigger conversation than just kicking and punching. And so Joni, my wonderful friend Joni here, and I mean that literally, Joni, we've known each other for, I want to say 20 years, but that's not true.
No,
it's than that.
What is it? Hold on. Yeah, it's going on 30 maybe.
Because it's in the 90s.
Yeah.
We met in the 90s, which, how did that become 30 years ago? Anyway, it's insane. But so kind of that's the context for what this series is about. And what we're going to talk about today with my friend Joni is, and this is the title, I wrote it down, I can't remember it, Stealing Your Intuition. We hear in situational awareness and self-defense all the time, trust your intuition, trust your gut. And how do you do that when there are folks, I don't mean this in a boogeyman way, but there are folks out there that constantly are undermining your intuition. And so we're going to look at this from a perspective of kind of the guru and the extreme kind of cult experience. But that's kind of more of a laboratory to kind of think about how we interact with people, how we think of leaders in our own lives, and how we maybe kind of give them some of our power. And when we give that away, it takes something from us, right? And so we're going to talk about this in terms of what does that look like? How do you recognize these patterns? Because if you're doing that in these kind of small everyday things, that's where it chips away at your intuition and your ability to use it. So all that to say, my long-winded introduction to Joni, you shared a post on social media recently about the James Arthur Ray story, who was a guy, he put on a sweat lodge and people died. And so you shared it and it just was riveting. So we've had some conversations. But I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself and talk about your lens, you're in seminary, right? You're in your church. What is your role? What is your title?
Well, in my church, I've been a lay chaplain for 14 years.
Yeah.
So that got so compelling to me that I went and go to Seminary in the Southwest, which is an Episcopal seminary here in Austin.
Yeah.
And it is spiritual direction and chaplaincy. So, yeah. So it is really what spiritual direction is as compared to, say, social work or psychology, is psychology listens to a client with an ear toward what can be corrected, mm-hmm. and how to bring a person back on track to help them flourish. Mm-hmm. Spiritual direction is the same thing, in that the idea is to support people in flourishing, but you look for, and we haven't talked about this. This is kind of cool. Spiritual directors look for those intuitive pieces when they're listening to people, mm-hmm. toward the spiritual where is this God, the universe, any sort of higher power? Where is that guiding you toward flourishing? So it's a little bit more of a let's look forward and see where your intuition and spirit can guide you, rather than how do we remove the roadblocks.
Ah, wow. So it is about honing and trusting and honoring that intuition.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't even talk about that before.
No, we didn't.
This whole new, like, this is
there
why
you go.
I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. So let's just jump in. So that's what your school, your current education is, and your experience as being a chaplain. I know you've shared with me some of your kind of the specific work of working with folks who are dying, and that level of service just sounds amazing. Anything else you want to say in your introduction before we kind of move into the meat of the work here?
Well, sure. I think that some of the stuff that also informs what we're going to be talking about today is a long arc of an interest that I have in consciousness studies, self-awareness, in which I've been doing for as long as you have, since we were both teenagers or early 20s, late teens. And so that informs and colors a lot of how I listen and how I see the world.
Yeah.
And the other thing is being nearly 34 years sober, also have those things all merge to give me a point of view that we're just gonna have a good time unpacking today, I guess.
Yeah, I love that, because you have this experience, through your church and through other self-help kind of stuff, for lack of a better word, seeker, and I have as well, and we'll talk about that. But it's like I've gotten value out of that. So like the last thing I actually want to do in this thing is to like, oh, this is bad and guru, like all that stuff. Because I've done some things. Let's just use, for example, because I know we've overlapped in this. I did it in Philly and then in Austin. I don't think we ever met when I was doing it in Austin. I think we were there at different times, but I did landmark education, which started out as EST, became Werner Erhard something, and then it became Landmark, and I guess that's what it still is. And I did it, yeah, like you said, as a teenager. I was, I think, 19 and up in Philly, and it radically shifted my perspective on things. I grew up in a very traditional evangelical Christian household, and there was just like a very specific worldview, and anybody that didn't think like that was going to go to hell. And that never jived with me. I kind of like just went along to get along kind of thing. But it never resonated for me. And then going and doing Landmark, it was just like, okay, let's just shake everything up. And I got a lot of value out of doing the stuff at Landmark. I got a lot of courage. I got a lot of integrity, is a word that they like to use a lot, in terms of if I say I'm going to do something, I'm just going to do it. And to do something just like really well, and like calling attention to details. So I got a ton of value. And I feel like just as importantly as those things, and those are things that are in their brochure, integrity, impeccability, all that kind of stuff. What wasn't in the brochure, but I swear one of the biggest positive lessons was a very painful negative lesson. This was when I was in Austin, and I've shared this story with you. I was doing a course, and I can't remember what the name of it was, but it was like a new course, and this would have been the early 90s. And I'm not going to say the person's name. We'll call him Robert. And
we both knew Robert, right?
We did. We both knew this person. When I was telling you the story, you're like, this makes sense, And so he was leading this course, and I think once a week, as a group, we all met in his home. And I can't even remember any details about what it was about or what we did or anything. What I remember was sitting in his living room with a group of people and just feeling like what he's saying and doing feels abusive. Like it wasn't sexual abuse. It wasn't like, it wasn't like overt abuse. It just made me really uncomfortable. And when I would speak up, I got squashed about it. And I remember one day just sitting in his living room and something in me clicked, and I'm like, yeah, this just doesn't work for me. And I just said that out loud, and I'm like, I'm just going to go. And everyone just kind of looked at me like, I was this, whatever, wild child. And I said to the group, because these people had become my friends, I was like, hey, if anybody, like, this doesn't work for me. I need to go. If anybody wants to have a phone call later just to kind of complete, I'm totally down with that. That's fine. And I left. And I didn't have hard feelings towards those folks. I just, again, I can't remember the details. I just had such an uncomfortable thing with this guy. And of course, you know, that was Landmark Education, but I know it's not unique to them. You know, you get people in power, and like, no matter what group you're in, it's always like, oh, well, if that feels uncomfortable to you, well, then push past that. That's where your growth is. And like, there's truth in that, but then there's not truth in that. Like, and you're shaking your head, like you've seen that, right?
Yes. Yeah. In listening to your story, I'm reminded of, in the work that I do, that we have chaplains, particularly in hospitals.
Yeah.
And these days, just got to be honest, these days it's COVID. We're dealing with, we deal more with family than we do patients.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So because we can't really get in and talk to patients, so yeah, it's a little different during this time. But contextually, really, I'm reminded of in the context of chaplaincy in a hospital, we have to remember, and I believe that in spiritual circles and religious circles, that leaders need to remember that their presence can take away agency. So Robert and the culture has to remember, as a leader or as leadership, you can remove people's agency by certain actions that you are or aren't taking. In our world, we call it spiritual malpractice. Mm-hmm. So if there are several horrible stories that I've heard of chaplains forcing ideas, say, on people. Mm-hmm. And and our job is to remember that that's not the work. The work is to appreciate and honor where somebody else is.
Right. Yeah.
And that's one. And if people are, particularly in situations that I can find myself in, people are vulnerable.
Yeah.
Not just like you are vulnerable with Robert, but extraordinary situations that are unusual, where people are experiencing uncertainty.
Yeah.
And we have to remember that our job is to provide them with agency. Otherwise, we really are robbing them of their own, of their intuition, of their feelings, of that sense that you got when you said you were leaving.
Yeah, well, and to again tie this into self-defense, then it's like, that's been my goal is to not teach someone exactly the steps to do something, but like, okay, if you're in that position, what are some things you can do, right? So if I prescribe something to them, that might work or it might not fit that situation. But it's about empower is not the right word, but like equipping people to move through their life so that they can make decisions as needed.
Exactly.
As opposed to what I'm hearing, like the distinction between like the experience I had, it was my will, right? Like, here's what I want for you. But it was kind of couched in, if you want what's for you, do what I say. But even though like that thing inside of me was like, this is just like wrong. It's just like, it felt so uncomfortable.
And it is, I want to throw in here, it is, in my line of work, it's not just malpractice, it sets people up for what we call complicated grief. Mm. So you don't just, it's not an issue of making the situation neutral. It exacerbates it. Mm-hmm. So it's just something interesting to look out for. For instance, the minister who hasn't had any training in social work. Yeah. In this particular instance that I'm recalling, told a woman who had just lost her newborn that they were both damned because she hadn't been saved.
Oh my God.
So in that vulnerable situation, he used his leadership
Yeah.
against her.
Wow. So what is that, right? Like even if you believe that to be true, and I don't agree with that, but even if you believe that to be
I don't
true,
either.
yeah, no, we're washing our hands of that belief. But even if you do believe that's true, like, why would you say that in that moment, right? Like, what are you accomplishing other than to make her feel worse? Like that's not leadership. I love how you're framing this to be about leadership and like responsible leadership and thoughtful leadership. Huh.
Well, in that, in that case, the story goes on. Actually, wrote a paper on this whole situation.
Yeah.
And how this ties into the current political climate.
Yeah.
Religious freedom versus this and that. So this guy went on to, when confronted about that, said that his job was to convert people.
Right. I recognize that now from my childhood. Yeah, I get it.
It's not to bring compassion or love to the situation. It's to convert people.
Yeah.
So
what better moment to convert her when she's vulnerable, right? Like here,
exactly.
Like, oh, I can really save your soul now because you're oh wow, that is what a worldview. So how do we? Let's shift gears here a little bit.
Yeah.
So we've identified that. I love how you're framing this about leadership, and that basically, I guess to put it in my own kind of layperson's terms, it's like you can abuse leadership or you can use it to elevate other people. Mm-hmm. And how does one recognize whether it's a martial arts or self-defense instructor or a minister or a teacher or a coach? And so I pulled, and I shared this with you. There's a list, and it comes from a woman named Dr. Alexandra Stein. And we won't go through the whole list. I'm not going to read this all out to you, but I'll put a link to this with the video. And she talks about, like, here's some signs to see like what your leader or what this organization is about. And were there any, Joni, that stood out to you that like are just the super red flags, like everybody should know, or anything that you found particularly interesting?
Well, let me look and see what we had here. Did I close it? No, I didn't. Here we go. Oh, well, are we talking about these discounting boundaries?
So that's actually, I want to tie that into Gavin Thacker's stuff, but I kind of want to define like what you're talking about a little bit about like how do you red flag particularly a guru?
Oh, okay. So really easy right here. The story that I told.
Yeah.
The group and person has the total and only answer.
Yeah.
So this guy is making and particularly in today's current climate, it's important to understand this guy is busy having only one worldview.
Yeah.
This perspective that is, it's like there's no other perspective. A privileged perspective, I might add, but that's a whole different show.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when confronted, again, he didn't take the criticism. It was
right.
It was.
I'm still right. Yeah.
Yep. The promise of perfection. So if somebody is, the only way to go is if you're saved. You know, there's no other. And of course, loosely, I'd say not answering questions might translate into not being open.
Yeah.
To serving someone else.
Right. Again, I love how you're bringing it back because it's about being of service to someone. So again, the list that Joni was just looking at is a list that comes from Dr. Alexandra Stein. She studies cults, and she has a really great list on her website that I'll put in a link. And instead of just reading them, it's, I just wanted to chat with Joni about some that stood out. And so, Joni, you mentioned, that, and this sounds so extreme, but it's like, a leader who comes across as I have the answer and I am the one with the answer. that's a super red flag. There's in kind of leading up to this conversation, I'd listened to another story about the NXIVM cult.
Yep.
Have you listened to any of that, or are you familiar with any?
Other than I've caught a couple of the podcasts,
Okay.
but not I have not gotten into it.
It's a fascinating story. When you get a chance, I think it would really be up your alley. But I mean, literally, the guy would tell people, "I'm the smartest man in the world," and
I remember that episode.
Yeah, it's like, but here's what I want to get at though, right? Because like to me, on the other side of this, that's like a laughable statement. Like, how do you even prove that? Like, can I see some test score? Like, what are you talking about? But like, it got him like currency with people. It got him far. And I find what's really curious, and this isn't on the list, but I remember studying in my undergrad, I studied sociology at University of Texas in Austin. And we talked about cults. And one of the things that they really, in this class, really emphasized, it wasn't about the leader so much, but it was about the group identity. Like, if this is where my friends are, then I'm going to be more susceptible to kind of following along, like as it gets weirder and weirder, like I get more and more okay with that. And so like, if you hear somebody say, I'm the smartest man in the world, it's like, okay, that's kind of ridiculous. But my new friend group is like, okay with it. Right. And so it's just like, that's that slippery slope.
Yeah. So in terms of my background,
yeah,
and what is interesting about where we're going with this conversation,
yeah,
is AA groups.
yeah,
There has, over the course of the last decade or so, there's been some critique of groups,
yeah,
recovery groups, if you will,
yeah,
because of the same sort of picking and choosing the same sort of abuse that might occur between a sponsor or the group itself, that the only way is AA, or the only way is,
yeah,
and however, it's still the most successful. This is what's tough, where that line is
yeah,
really, really thin, is that this is, I would be willing to say, it is a sort of a cult.
yeah,
But and over the course of the first couple of 3 years of my sobriety, I was grateful for a cult like that. But the job really of the group is to help support you in becoming independent of the group,
yeah,
to go out into the world and really be a part of it. So
yeah,
that's another red flag, I think, that if you're not being encouraged to learn what you need to learn,
yeah.
and then go be in the world, then I just think that's another red flag.
Because then it's about the group, not about what you pointed to earlier. It's not about your growth.
That's right.
And how to move forward. Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, and it's so funny because it's like I have dear people I care about that have gotten a lot of value out of AA, and so it's like I would never say, oh, terrible AA, but it's like, it's what are those lines? And it's interesting how we want to maybe paint a group or whatever, like with this like very like specific label, making it bad, but maybe it's just like that particular chapter or that particular leader, that kind of thing. Because so much I think this, do you think that this just, I'm kind of a skeptic about human nature, especially right now in this COVID world that we're in and everything happening. Is it just that as simple as power corrupts? That I just might be an otherwise nice person, but then I get in the situation of authority and I just kind of get greedy for that. It's, I guess, a human nature question. What do you think of that?
Man, I don't know. But recently, I actually don't know. Though I do know this. Recently, recently I was brought back to, and I posted this quote. I don't remember who it is, but the line between good and evil runs through the heart of every man.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't run, or human. It doesn't actually run through. It doesn't run through although systems are created by people,
Right.
but at the heart of the matter, I think it is the human.
Yeah.
And that power might, I mean, it really might corrupt. If
Yeah.
we're, if I know that Robert Greenleaf in The Servant Leader would bring us back to this is interesting, what you and I originally keep doing as seekers is to be self-aware, to create some level of emotional intelligence. And if that's not there, I think it's really easy for an individual to get totally corrupted by power entirely. And I remember being surprised way too late in life, really, to come to real honest terms with the fact that I worked for leaders that were horrible.
Mm.
That in the how did you get here if you weren't trying to be more self-aware or be this or that? But they're everywhere. They're
Yeah. And I want to say it ties back to that whole piece about we get pulled into these things because it's our friend groups, right? And I've been in situations where I'm like, this doesn't feel right to me. I'm going to leave. And it's actually very painful. And it makes you sad. It makes me sad. And, some of those friendships, like I've just kind of like walked away from, and then they just don't reach out to me because I'm not a part of that group anymore, is usually how it goes. It's not usually some big explosion or something. But yeah, I mean, I feel like that's a lesson I learned because it's very rife in the martial arts world, right? And I've been guilty of this, where it's like you see someone who is so like physically gifted and dynamic and all this stuff, and to put them on a pedestal, and then to realize some of the not more healthy aspects of their life. I want to be careful how I say this, but I've seen abuse in the martial arts world, physical abuse. Oh, you're not handling this well then let me make sure that you don't miss that punch because I'm going to punch you now. You know what I mean? It's I've seen that. And then I've seen it, kind of in the self-defense world, kind of the guru kind of aspect happening. And it's hard to like make those relationships and then to kind of pull back and not be a part of that anymore. So I feel like maybe sometimes it's just easier to go along. So
yeah, and it is tough. Uh, Again, that line of good and evil, that I guess the point is we're all capable of that. So yeah. It's squishy. It's just so squishy to let's just bring this. I'll just bring this up.
Yeah.
Since we've both done Landmark, so Werner Erhard as a personality, if you recall, got into a big mess, and so there was all sorts of gossip or truth or what have you or not, but the stories and all of that, and it became very difficult for him to continue to run Landmark the way. Sure. And I don't remember if it's his kids now or what have you, but that his work made a huge difference in my life, probably in yours.
In my life, definitely, yeah.
And none of that changes because of this other stuff happening. Yeah. So that's where it gets so dang squishy. Whether it's leaving a relationship that's abusive, there are things that worked. Yeah. There are things that were valuable in that, or a group. A group that worked. So that's a little bit of what I mean by stealing your intuition. When it gets squishy like that, and people have the capacity to be generous and good, but they're also awful, and it's so those loving actions begin to, then you start questioning. You start questioning your own intuition.
Yes.
In the face of all that.
So stealing your intuition is stolen from you. You coined that. I just thought it was so brilliant. But I also want to say something that you said to me, Joni, years ago. This was over 10 years ago, maybe, when I was getting out of a relationship that culminated with domestic violence. And I can't remember exactly how our conversation was going, but I was feeling like such a dumbass sucker for putting up with the shit towards the end that I did. Like, you know, that whole, you know, trying to figure it out. And you said to me that, because I can't remember exactly what it was now that I said, but that's not even important. You said he was taking advantage of my kindness. And, you know, he had come back from Afghanistan and was going through some terrible, you know, he had some terrible experiences there. And, you know, I was trying to be, you know, all this. And, you know, whether it was conscious or not, like I let my kindness or my love or like that openness get taken advantage of. And so, like, where do you draw? And it's so funny, you know, for me to share that story, because a lot of people think, oh, Beverly, like this might be a lot of news for people. I'm like, I am such a softie. People have no idea. I have this crusty exterior, but I am like chocolate and melted on the inside. You know, but because I've been there, right? And you know that. And you, gosh, Joni, you were there in court with me, right? When I had to go get that restraining order. And, you know, that was a tough time, but I just really want to acknowledge that, you know, what you said to me then was very helpful. And it is someone taking advantage of your good nature. Do you remember saying that?
I don't. I don't. But gosh, I feel great. I feel validated years later. But I think something we also talked about a couple of weeks ago was not just kindness, but the culture. We live in this culture where women who are abused still have this. There's still this stigma, this judgment about them.
Yeah.
Or I just want to say women and men.
Yeah.
That they're not smart because they're still there, and or that they or we find ourselves surprised that intelligent people find themselves in situations. But it ties back to what you're talking about. Compassionate, smart people who give others the benefit of the doubt are actually easier, I think, easier targets.
Oh, interesting.
Because they're willing to go, I know that this is my case. I'm willing to do everything that I can to right the situation.
Right.
And if you're self-aware, that can easily be robbed by somebody who wants to take advantage of you by you continuing. In my case, I would continue to look to see what I could do to correct myself.
Yeah.
I was so busy. You get so busy doing that,
that
there's not enough realization that outside of your point of view, there's a jerk who's doing stuff to you.
That's really well said. I really relate to that on a lot of levels, like in a business level and just in a like a friendship acquaintance level. And like when you set those boundaries, like you just like, okay, am I handling this right? And I don't want to be the jerk. And I'll tell you, I was a jerk to somebody a couple of weeks ago, and it made me really sad and upset, but it was just like, I need to shut this down. Like it was, I didn't take glee in it, but it was just, I don't know. I want to share that because it's, you know, I teach boundary set. I teach all these things. It never gets easy, right? I'm nearly 50 years old. I can tell somebody on the street to go fuck themselves when like they're coming at me to mug me. But like on the inside, that never gets easy. But that's, I think, where the challenge or the work or the whatever is. It's like you have to know that that's not going to be easy and still do it anyway. Whether it's walking away from like the friendships that we've talked about or organizations.
Yeah, there's, well, and in the current political climate, so just something that you've said is that I actually haven't mentioned, that is my pet project right now, is a group called Conscious Conversation.
Yes, I love what you're doing. Yeah.
And
can you just share a little context for what that is for folks?
Sure. We're working on what it takes to bridge the gap between people, and we do it by having conversations about divisive topics.
Like right into the fire.
Go right in there. And I find myself, in terms of setting boundaries, I still find it's not just setting boundaries, It's in even having a conversation with someone. I still get as much work as I try to do on bridging this gap. It is still sometimes utterly terrifying to confront someone who these days who may do awful things to you just for you, just by the suggestion that there's another point of view, another another way of seeing something. And just how mean people can get on the next door group in emails. So and I can, in terms of what we're talking about, I still catch myself knowing my truth, absolutely knowing my truth and my point of view about, really, my point of view is the world is good. And we are having some challenges and some barriers to that right now, but we got to go through them. But I still can find myself, well, maybe that person's right, and maybe they are, but there's a place where you have to set the boundary. Conspiracy theories, this or that. I have friends who or acquaintances anyway that are, this word, conspiritualists. So they're awesome, amazing spiritual people, and then they'll post something that is not even the pandemic. That's not, y'all know. No. So these are real subtle. I think that there are subtle ways in the current culture and the current climate where we can get sucked in, and people will take advantage of us in the same way that we got to talking about how James Ray did that.
Yeah, well, I think that's an interesting case because, and I'll put links to this podcast, because this is what started you and I having this conversation. Was you posted something about it, and I'm like, ooh, that's interesting. And I listened, and in that story, you know, the folks talked about how, like, their intuition bells were going off, but, you know, and then there was these things, and there was always these buts. It was like, oh, he's the leader, he'll take care of me. Oh, you know, nobody else is doing it, like all kinds of stuff. I think the thing that got me the most, kind of as an aside, was how it was such a physically demanding thing, but he wasn't a doctor, nor did he have anyone there on the, like, from the medical establishment. You know, it's like, maybe he's done it a million times, but you don't know if somebody has a bad heart or a bad, you know what I mean? It's just like, it's, and I think that's kind of comes back to where the leader knows all, right? Like, I may not have a medical degree, but I'm going to put you at at physical risk without having, you know, an EMT there or something like that. So but kind of coming back to what you're saying about the intuition, like, those things always come up. That intuition is always there. And according to Dr. Alexandra Stein, that's what I'm going to see here. It's, where is it? I just want to read. Oh, she says, literally, your gut feeling tells you something's wrong. Trust this and try to analyze it. So she says that, right? Like, our gut is telling us what's wrong. I want to kind of talk about the DeBecker stuff you mentioned, but do you have anything else to say about that? Because it tells us that, and then, like you so eloquently said, they steal your intuition with these tactics.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's not mentioned, at least in the way that I'm going to say it here, is, and my awesome wife Tammy pointed this out, that a leader, let me see how she put it, the whole, if a leader is presuming to know everything, they don't know everything. Here's what it was. If the work is not about you and it's about them.
Oh, yeah.
That's a huge red flag.
Yeah.
That's a huge red flag.
Which is interesting, because this guy, James Ray, when he was doing these courses, he was broke and living, like, very, like, modestly, because he was broke, but all of his courses had like the word, not all of them, but the majority had the word, like, wealth in their title. Like, he's like, you come to me, I'll teach you how to be wealthy. But he didn't have that himself. Like, his whole plan to get wealthy was, you paying me and I'll tell you how to get wealthy. And that was his plan. And it was like, you know, of course, hindsight's 2020. And like, I can see that big context. I mean, if you're in that environment, and you may not know how impoverished he was living at the time. He, you know, was putting on a front. But yeah, it's definitely easy to see that. It's like they're trying to get their own shit figured out, and you're their lab rat.
Yeah, you know, and one more thing about all that is I can't recall her name, but the woman whose daughter died, and the organization that she has now.
Yeah,
I went to the website.
It's really interesting. Yeah,
she has a lot of big name, and this is what's tricky about this. She has a lot of big name individuals in the self-help, self-awareness, new age community that she's invited to sign off.
Yeah.
None of whom have, like Jack Canfield and Wayne Dyer.
Well, he's passed. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, way from, but these and so several names that I recognize, and having done some of the work with these big name people, what is also tricky is to understand that part of what she's asking these individuals to do can possibly prohibit the kinds of breakthroughs they're trying to work with. For instance, Joe Dispenza is working on neuroscience in ways that regular science might not see as legitimate currently.
Okay.
But we're growing. But there's growing evidence that the work he's doing is legitimate. Now, he doesn't put anybody in harm's way.
Well, that was so I don't know anything about him, but like immediately my red flags, it's like, well, is what he's doing ethical, and is it safe? And it, you know, like, I don't know, because I don't know anything about him.
No, he's actually, his work is actually quite amazing. And all people do is meditate. And outside of that, the workshops do include some of the stuff that Werner Erhard used to do, zip lining and that sort of thing. But he brings in professional companies whose work it is to do that. Yeah. And I'm afraid I'm not explaining this very, very well, but that I can. Again, it's that really thin line. Yeah. Of ensuring that, and sometimes your intuition is all you have.
Yeah. So I'm just looking up something really quick because I want to give the person. Yeah. Okay. So I think what I'm hearing you say, it's about the pendulum swinging to the other side, right? And it's like, how do we kind of manage these things? And it's like, okay, if I get a seal of approval from some organization, that still doesn't do jack, you know, if my intuition, or it doesn't mean jack if my intuition's going off, right? It's like outsourcing. This is something I talk about frequently in my classes. It's like, you cannot outsource your safety to someone else. If you think that the cop is going to be there in 2 seconds to whatever, you're mistaken. If you think that, you know, unless you can walk around with a bodyguard. So I went to her website as well, and I appreciate the sentiment, but it also kind of struck me as like, well, what makes her the authority to say what's appropriate, what's not? And you know, it's this could get a little dicey, but it's there's a book by Daniel Pink, and I can't remember the name of it, but he wrote it about violence, and I'll look it up. And the thing that stood out to me, it's like so much, whether it's violence or disease or that kind of thing, like we suddenly, like there's a whole industry of the victim turned expert, and they have a lived experience that is incredibly valuable. And I will never like say that it's not, but that's like one particular experience. So it's very tricky to, you know, if this is their view, there's a whole other big view. So it circles back to who's the authority here, by whose authority. So maybe this all boils down to my own authority issues.
That's what I'm thinking. Like I think the true work is to explore what it means to have your own agency.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
every situation. So
Yeah.
I think it would be fair, at least the way I'm seeing this, is a facet of self-defense.
Yeah.
Includes understanding, appreciating, and honoring your own agency.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's as true physically as it is psychically as it is emotionally.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll give you two examples from the self-defense world. I was working with a very well-known instructor at a workshop, and we're talking about how women get grabbed. And he was insisting, like, the main way women get grabbed, like if I'm grabbing your shoulders, right? If a man's grabbing her here. And he was talking about defenses, and he was kind of poo-pooing how some people teach getting grabbed by the wrist. And was that Sam?
Yes.
Hi, Sam. The cutest dog on the internet.
Sam.
He's like, did you forget about me? I wanted to play with you earlier, Sam, and you were being arrogant and not wanting to play. But anyway, so he was like, oh no, women don't get, and I'm like, dude, I've literally been grabbed like that. Like, seriously, like by my ex, by like, in like crowded clubs. And it's like, you can't tell me how a woman isn't grabbed. Maybe it's not as common, but it's happened to me on more than one occasion. And so it's I don't know, I guess that's maybe part of my problem with authority. And in my approach to self-defense, I was having this conversation the other day. It's like, I really want to, in my work, move the sense of authority out of like the expert and into the community, right? Like, you're the expert in your world. And, things that I teach, and I've learned this from Black women and women, or particularly Black women, like, cause I'm a yeller, like, I'll tell you to go fuck yourself if something goes down, but that's actually can be escalating in their situation. There's the whole angry Black woman stereotype that they have to contend with. So it's like, okay, cool. Like, I need to just like shut up and learn then. I don't remember how we got off on that tangent, but I just had to tell that story. It was just like, and he was like telling me how wrong I was. And it was like that's literally happened to me at least 5 times. So,
I don't know what it's worth, but in the course of telling your story, I'm reminded of something my friend Lou Epstein used to say: never put another's head above your own.
Yeah. Well, and again, as I was thinking about this conversation, it's not so much about the cult, it's about the guru.
Yeah.
And how much power we're willing to give them. And I do want to tie this in to what we started talking about earlier with Gavin DeBecker, who is just, I'll just say it, like, he's a guru or whatever you want to say. Like, he in The Gift of Fear, he just wrote things in such a like no shit way. That's what I've seen that, and he was able to articulate it. And he has a section in his book on the book, if you're not familiar with it, it's The Gift of Fear and Other Survival Signals That Protect Us from Violence. And it's about reading the signals, reading people, reading physical, reading manipulations, all kinds of stuff. And so he talks about, one of them is discounting boundaries. Basically, if I say no, and keeping going. That's what we're talking about here, right? Like, in these guru situations, these people walked into a sweat lodge, they were uncomfortable and either started to leave, or they'd been so programmed to like overrun, like whenever they resisted in the past, it's like, oh, well, that's your resistance. And if you want the thing that you came for, you have to push past that resistance. So that's like, I don't know what order he put this in the book anymore, but it's like, to me, that's like the main red flag. If someone discounts your boundaries, if they discount your no, they're actually telling, the way I talk about this with my students, they're giving you a ton of information about themselves, and you need to get the fuck out.
Yeah, that's in having it. I bring that back to my world in conscious conversations.
Yeah.
When somebody's talking about their point of view about how wrong you are, That's always about them.
Oh, that's interesting. How wrong you are, you said.
Or
Is that,
how wrong or how wrong your point of view is, or they're just saying, and their resistance to your approach, that tells you more about them, if you're listening,
yeah,
than it does about you. They're not talking about you. What is it recently? You're not the main character in anybody else's story.
yeah.
They are.
Extra. You're an extra.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really interesting, because like the folks that, and again, it's not those people over there. Like, I've gone to these things to improve skills or to have a breakthrough in my life. It's like, so you go, like, you're primed to want something. And so it's like, yeah, whatever it is I want in my life, a new job, or, the desire to move or start a bit, like whatever it is, it's like, I've tried everything thus now, and I know that I'm something's missing, right? Like, if I'm just going to spin my wheels, I may as well ask for help. And so that's what I would say. That's why people go to these things. And then that's where the opportunity then to just like be like, well, if you want that breakthrough, do this thing.
Well, and the whole, Tammy and I have talked about this, the whole industry is kind of set up to abuse you in a certain kind of way.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
In that I'm not going to benefit unless there's something about you that's wrong that I can fix. So I'm still working it through. Because I know that the work that people are doing is to be of service to others,
right,
who are having some barriers to flourishing, and at the same time, there's got to be something to fix,
right,
in order, and gurus will take advantage of what you are coming to them for, to improve, to fix.
But I want to backtrack to what you said earlier, because you talked about your first 3 years in AA. Like, you needed that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to use the word heavy hand. That's not the word you use, but that, whatever that was.
Sure.
And so, like, what's the distinction there in terms of not going down a dark place with that?
Yeah. Well, I don't know yet.
Yeah.
Other than to come back to I think we all have an inner guidance system, a GPS that is intuitive.
Yeah.
And again, I think that people who are willing to take advantage of that's abuse.
Yeah.
If people are willing to take, that's where the guru who wants to take advantage of that, the person you're in a relationship with, the boss, the whatever, if anybody's going to take advantage of your intuition, that's probably the biggest red flag, I think.
Yeah. That's really well said. Well, and I wish I had had the time or whatever to the Dr. Alexandra Stein's list and then comparing it to Becker's. And just because he talks about discounting boundaries, the use of charm, right? If someone's being overly charming and nice, like, that's a guru, right? They may not be nice, but they're charming. They've got that charisma about them. Becker talks about forced teaming. So it's the we, like, what are we going to do? How are we going to have this breakthrough? Typecasting. So Becker, when he talks about typecasting, it's me pigeonholing you. And like, Joni, don't be so weak. Like, I'm giving you that label. And so if I call you weak, now you have to prove to yourself and to me, I'm not weak, I'm strong. I'm going to push through this for this breakthrough. And making unsolicited promises. There's a few more here, but I don't want to necessarily get into every one of them. But I think it's really interesting how Becker, he does this in the context of violence. He does this in the context of predators, not necessarily of the guru persuasion, but they match up, right? They line up. And so I think, if I talk about Becker, I swear I'm not getting like an affiliate fee or something, but he, it's just such, like, that section on the interview. It just, as I was reading through Stein's list, I was like, holy moly, it's the same manipulation. It's how you get manipulated.
Yeah, yeah. You know, something you said, two things. One, Gavin's book is, I haven't read it in years,
Yeah.
and it still has an impact
Yeah.
on how I function.
Yeah.
And I can still think of things that have made a huge difference, and just the stories. And the other thing is, don't when you said don't be so weak. So when it in again in for what it's worth, when when you're having a conscious conversation with somebody, and that is the statement that somebody offers, don't be so this or don't be so that. It's really not that complicated if you can engage the part of your brain to remind yourself that in a healthy debate, it's actually up to the person who accused you of that to prove it, not you.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
It's not up to you to
Yeah.
prove to anybody that. It's up to them to, it's like, that's your argument. You need to prove it.
Yeah, but so okay, I'm just like, you're in this room with all these people and they're doing the work and they're processing, and you come up against something and they're working with you. And I've been in these rooms, you've been in these rooms, right? And it's like, if you don't want to go there, they may not say you are weak in those words,
Yeah.
but it's like, that's the connotation. And so they actually flip that around and make it to be on you to prove. And it's like, I have to prove that because I came here to have a breakthrough in my relationship or something. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't have an answer, but this is, I just feel like we're dissecting.
I know, it's so tricky. It's so tricky, isn't it? We may need another session.
Oh my goodness, this is so juicy. Well, it's like, I don't even know how long we've been talking, and the recorder's not telling me, but I guess there's one question I have want to ask for you, but is there anything else? Like, I feel like we could go on with this, but I don't know. I feel like we need to just digest this. But my big question is for someone who is a seeker, whether it's something as far out there as, going and, to some mountaintop retreat and whatever. And I've done those, like those 10 days of silence have been miraculous. But whether it's something that, or whether it's a martial arts school, again, kind of like a more mundane thing. If someone's a seeker, are we scaring them out of seeking? Like, how do we not do that? What words of wisdom do you have in your many years of seeking?
I don't know if I have much wisdom. I'm going to come back to something that Tammy can continue to point out, as I brought our conversations back to her, and how engaging they were for the both of us, is most of all, as seekers, the important thing to look for in the work that is offered is, at first, how much it really resonates with you.
Mm-hmm.
And if the people offering it are really being of service to you, that the benefit is for you, not for them.
Yeah.
And another thing is, this thing with James Ray that just gets me is, there is really a limit to how much you should pay. It's just like, that's
right, because I can't remember, like, it was like $10,000 or something.
Yeah,
like,
yeah. I realize people have to make a living, but
a person, that's a lot.
Some philosophies.
Yeah.
There are some philosophies. Tammy studies Dr. David Hawkins, and he's a psychiatrist turned spiritual turned, and a lot of people, he's like their guru, but but in a good way, if you will. Points out that someone who really wants to be of service wouldn't charge at all. But we live in a world where you have to.
Got to eat, yeah.
Yeah, you got to eat. But that there's that it's a gift, and to if people are willing to, and leaders are willing to treat what they're doing as a gift that they've been given, that they want to give to you.
Yeah.
And it serves you, then go for it. But other than that, what we've talked about here are those important boundaries to look for. You do have to trust your own intuition
Yeah.
and not let that, not let people rob you of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what I'll do before, when I upload this or before I upload this, I'll just kind of list those things out,
Yeah.
and so people can have that visual. Because it's because we've talked about these markers, but I'm a visual person, so I think it might be helpful. Yeah, gosh, Joni, this has been really. I've enjoyed this conversation. I know we've talked a few other times prior to this.
And it wasn't this conversation.
It wasn't. No, it totally, like, I thought it was going to go this way and it went that way.
Yeah.
And like, that's why I enjoy talking to you. But yeah, again, it's coming from the self-defense world, I feel like it's not just about the kicking and the punching. Like, there's work that we have to do. And this is not about victim blaming. In fact, I think for me, I say it's society blaming, right? Because we don't like equip people with these skills. Like, no one ever handed me Gavin DeBecker in junior high or middle school and said, look out for this kind of thing. And I feel like that's what's missing. So, if we can kind of get, like, I just really want to expand that conversation of self-defense. So I thank you so much for being here to be a part of that, and having people still seek and still grow and do so in a way that honors their intuition.
Oh, well, thanks. I'm so excited to have had another conversation with you, and I can't wait to have some more. And I hope it's effective and useful. So.
Yeah. I'm with you, my friend.